Good morning. Suzy Vance from Creating from the Heart, the Artistry of Living, and I'm here with Jamie Wallen of the Quilters Apothecary.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here. And I have to say, you look lovely today and very comfortable in this heat.
You look like
I'm
you're
ready for the
go.
islands, right?
So, Jamie, I'm sitting in your studio. I'm not sure everybody can see, but it's gorgeous. There are all these images of quilts and everything. Oh. Have you always done this?
No, I started this, I was a RN, I was a nurse for years and years and years, burned out nurse, who was, had ended his time in nursing homes, and that really kind of burned me out, and watching people pass constantly was not good for my soul, eventually.
Yes.
Even though it was wonderful to walk people there.
It is a gift of sorts.
Right, and I was a 70 or 80 hour a week workaholic.
My goodness.
And so what happened was I had no hobbies, other than my dogs and the house and paying the bills and putting money in the bank, because I never did anything other than work. So I happened to go to a friend's house to help him put up a fence. His wife was a piecer back then, and I always want to differentiate between a piecer quilts or pieces quilt tops, and then a quilter quilts the three layers of the quilt together. So that's how we kind of differentiate.
And there are a lot of people I know that do the piecing.
Yes.
And then they quit.
Yes.
And the pieces become tops.
Yep.
And they just
languish. They languish. Or we pick them up at Salvation Armies and thrift shops and that sort of thing. But most people follow through because it is an addictive art form and or hobby or craft, whatever you want to call it. So anyways, I went, and this is about 25 years ago, I went to a friend's house and I opened a magazine that was sitting on the table of his wife's, and I saw this giant quilting machine, kind of like the ones you see back here. And I thought, oh, that's a giant art pencil. And so my goal for me was to use that to do portraiture with thread. Kind of freehand embroidery, thread painting type stuff, which is what I do, as well as do traditional quilting, because that pays the bills, of course.
I got it.
And so, like, for example, in Michigan City, I'd say there's probably 2,000 or 3,000 piecers on and off that love to piece quilt tops. And so they need to get them quilted, because you either like to do one or the other.
Oh, really?
Now, we have some people, now I like to piece, but what I love to do is create the art on the quilt and tie it together, right? With the quilting and the artistry. That's my artistry, even though I love to piece. But typically most people that just want to piece, they want to piece. They don't want to do the quilting. It's secondary. It's almost like making art and then you send it off to a framer and mat.
I got it.
We're kind of the finisher. So we kind of finish the process.
Got it.
In a very basic way. And then, of course, I've been doing that now for 25 years, left nursing about 20 years ago, I think.
And how did that happen, please? Tell me the story.
So I, again, burned out nurse. And what I did was I started, purchased my machine.
Did you know you were burned out and looking?
Oh, I knew. I knew I was reaching expiration date. As a nurse, just because, especially a male nurse, at that time in Michigan, which is where I was, what was happening was, again, we would be mandated. So you were doing 70, 80 hour weeks, which is, and I hadn't had a vacation in probably 10 years. So, because everything was always short-staffed and that sort of thing. It's not that way in hospitals and a lot of private practices. But it was that way in the nursing home facilities, and there were a lot of budget cuts and that sort of thing. And so I just knew I was kind of getting done. You can only take that for so long. And I don't think I was just smart enough to go back to the hospitals, which I'd probably still be a nurse then. But
I'm so glad.
But I'm glad I didn't.
What did this? You walked into a friend's house.
So I walked into a friend's house. She was piecing. I saw the magazine. I looked at this machine. I drove 2 days later because I was on vacation, my first vacation in years. I drove 2 days later to Iowa to purchase one of these silly machines because I had all the money in the bank because I never spent it. So I did. I got it, and about a year or two, I was kind of the novelty male quilter. Quilting just started booming. It started becoming. It started its boom. Boom town.
It's really interesting because when I told my husband today I was coming to see you, he said, "Well, there really aren't very many quilters. People don't quilt anymore." And I wanted to say to him,
Oh yeah, yeah, guilds everywhere. And there are, I think it's just, I think during my time, I think what happened was mid 90s, late 90s, it was a place where women could get together, predominantly women, obviously, could get together, and it was like therapy without being therapy. It was a place where people could kibitz about relationships.
Just like the Weaver's Guilds.
Because I think that went away in the 80s. I think it was all about work and our upwardly mobile lifestyle. I know it was for me as well. And I think we lost that socialization. I think we lost that self-therapy of coercing with each other, and just like with the guilds, the women getting together for their bees, and then they started allowing men in as long, there was always an audition, right? Are you going to fit into our group, or are you going to be a jerk? And I was not that guy because I've always worked with women, and I've always think that women save the world. I think we need women in charge.
Okay.
But that being said, so it was just kind of a nice transition for me. I ended up within 2 years being the guy in my area. This was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, Battle Creek, Michigan, lower Southwest. What happens though was these machines started being sold. Quilt shows became this big thing. I mean, big thing. There was one on every corner. And so they started selling these machines. There were all these companies, and they were telling people you could buy one of these machines, have it in your house, make $100,000 a year quilting other people's quilts and all of this stuff. Well, what happened is when you get a machine like this and they dump it and they're out of there, you have a lot of people that are like, what do I do now?
Right.
And so I started mentoring locally people. I had about anywhere between 10 to 20 people locally that would buy machines, and they'd call and say, Jamie, I'm in a jam. What do I do? I don't even know how to use this thing. They dropped it off. And so I'd go and I'd help them through. At that point, I was already established as someone that people wanted me to put my own designs that I had to come up with, because none of us knew what we were doing. It was just starting.
Yeah.
And so I came up with a lot of my own designs. And so I just started teaching people so that they could make a living, because they were taking out mortgages on their house to work out of their home so that they could be home with their children. It was also the late 90s, which was a time where it seemed like there was a large exodus of husbands. And so a lot of my friends were in new situations. They were single, trying to raise their children, and also needing something that they could do and also still take care of their children, because childcare was so expensive. And so that was kind of where I started my niche, because of course, women, of course, are my life and are my friends. They are my tribe. I mean, I love men, but I prefer to be around the energy of women, that creative energy.
Well, they don't hold back.
They don't hold back, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I know that might sound odd to some people. It's just, it's where I belong.
Yeah. Well, you are who you are, and it shows.
Yeah, and it became, the archetype. I've always carried kind of the archetype of teacher and caretaker and big brother, and so it just kind of
morphed into another
things
scene.
Happen. It comes together, and it's the glue that binds. And I got a lot of my needs met, because friendship, camaraderie, collaboration, all of that wonderful creative energy started coming back to life for the millions. I have to say millions of women who went into, and again, some men,
Yes.
who went into the whole quilting arts.
Right.
And it just morphed into this thing from a lovely scrap quilt into these beautiful portrait pieces that were in museums, and they were being valued at $20,000 to $30,000, and that was kind of the direction I wanted to go, because I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in giving back socially.
Thank you. You
And
believe in
so-
making a contribution.
Absolutely. And so my tithe was utilizing my business that I was developing my brand for to help feed the hungry, help house people, help do the things for women that were in situations that they needed to get out of but didn't have a way out of. And so that's kind of how this grew for me into what it is today. And it's evolved into something
I love
different,
it,
but,
and that's why the name Apothecary.
Quilters Apothecary, your prescription for a happy and healthy life.
I love it.
So, yeah.
So I understand that you teach.
I do. I have been teaching for about 15 years now. 20, because I really was doing it early on, but then I needed it to provide income to do the work that I wanted to do out socially.
Right.
And so I started traveling all over the world and teaching. I had already developed a bit of a name, so I was very lucky. And I have to say that it's a backhanded lucky. By backhanded lucky, what I mean by that is I am aware that there was a period in time in which the attention that was given to me was because I was male.
Yeah.
And I have all of that respect and all of that honor that I give that without exploiting it in a way. I didn't want to exploit it in a way for power to empower myself. I chose, because of my desires for my community,
Right.
to use it to empower everybody. I wanted to share that power and not exploit it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
and
It
so-
makes a great deal of sense.
Right. So that's how I wanted to utilize that. I knew that I had been receiving entitlement, and that entitlement was being male, and so it was being token. And I wanted it to be something that I used in a good way rather than a exploitive way that didn't do anything for anybody. Yeah.
Except you.
Except, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So that was it. And I still work 70-hour weeks. You know,
But
so
you're doing what you love.
I'm doing what I love, and I'm exhausted, and it's a wonderful exhaustion. And because it's a creative thing, one thing leads to another, and it's never boring. And I'm not the same person. You know, I was God bless my mother and father. But if I would have continued, I would have been working every day and sitting in front of the TV at night, not doing the things that I'm doing to help society with the gifts that I have to offer. Right? I would have
Yes.
just been living and existing. I
Right.
wouldn't have been.
It's an evolution.
It's an evolution.
And
a whole different
I
life.
have the feeling that we're each put on the planet
Yes.
with gifts.
Yes.
And life is a lifelong exploration of those
Yes.
gifts. And those gifts never stop giving.
I agree.
And it's you know, so many people in this world are doing what they don't want to do
Oh, I know. Yeah. And doing it poorly because they don't want to do it.
because their heart's not in it.
Their heart's not
They're
in
not
it.
creating from the
They're
heart.
not creating. And I also would say, if I can wax a little philosophical, I see the things going on right now, the polarization of everybody. And I'm sad because I know in my heart that polarization is because there seemed to be a time in the 90s when a lot of the daily grind that fed people that they do when they worked for corporations that would take care of them, and that they knew that if they dumped their lives into them, that there would be this wonderful loyalty given back and forth. And it wasn't. Same in nursing. I mean, it was the same in nursing. Things shifted and people became numbers, I think. And it doesn't matter what side of the fence you lived on, that's how it was. And I think that when people lose that connection, that they matter to the people that they are receiving their money from, that energy, right? Because that's all money is. That I think people get stagnant. And I think that then division starts. Because then we start looking for places to blame. Because they're bored.
It's resentment.
They're not doing things.
No.
They're not creating things.
They don't feel good about what they do.
Absolutely. I see change. I do autism awareness stuff. And like I said, I do things with different shelters for women. There is something that happens. And again, there are things that I do with men that are in some crisis too. When they come in and they start learning a trade and they start that creative thing, it's like one thing builds on the next thing and they're no longer looking to just exist.
Right.
It feeds itself.
No, it feeds itself. It feeds your heart.
It feeds your soul.
Energy, and you get energized about it.
And you get energized, and you want to do things, and you want to move forward.
Right.
A bored society is not a healthy society. It's just not. And so, as again, quilting for me is not about making blankets. It's a very spiritual thing. The whole concept of quilts in general are you're creating something to keep people warm.
Yes.
To provide comfort.
Yes.
We do a lot of quilts for people that are surviving cancer. For comfort quilts. We do a lot of quilts for children that are being placed in foster care so that they have something to take with them. And that's theirs and that is personal. And that is hopefully some security, that sort of thing. There are quilts being created, of course, to bury children that are born still, of course. And it's just, there are so many, quilting is its own form of love in a very spiritual way, that I have not found in any of the other art forms, and there have been a lot of them that I've explored. It's a different thing. It's a very different thing when you think of a quilt. What the whole purpose. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing.
It's been an honor. This is wonderful.
It's been really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
And thank you for letting me blather on.
It's the blathering on that connects somebody who's watching to their passion.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's great. Thanks. Creating from the heart, Suzy Vance. See you again next time.